Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast. Thankfully, this week we are not talking about the U.S. elections, so you can take a load off, kick those feet up. And we're talking about something that's a little bit more crazy, honestly. When I first heard this story, it sounded like something out of a Mission Impossible movie, but unfortunately, it's a lot more serious than that. Last Friday, November 27th of 2020, a top nuclear scientist for Iran by the name of Sorry, here we go. I was practicing this before this. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was assassinated. So we're going to go into how it happened, what happened, and what are the reactions of Iran and who are they blaming? So Alex, when you heard about this, what did you think? Because we've actually covered an Iranian assassination before, so would be number 2 for us. So what are your first thoughts?
I mean, honestly, man, I'm not really very surprised. Iran, especially, I would say Iran kind of got back into the global spotlight in, what was it? I think it was 2015, 2014 when the Iran deal was signed. I think it was 2015. And I feel like since then, Iran's become another political issue, especially in the West. And since then, it's kind of been war hawks, especially on the right in a lot of countries, not just the United States, and especially in Israel, who are very anti-Iran and believe that Iran is a bad actor no matter what. And to be honest, Iran is a bad actor. I don't think they're the worst in the Middle East. I think there's a lot worse actors that we do business with. But I'm not surprised, man. I'm really not. But I just want to start with this one thing because I think it paints my worry. Is that I really worry that if Trump's administration isn't careful, there could be a serious conflict that escalates in the Middle East. I think it's one that's less about jihad and terrorism, like Bush's, crusade in Iraq. And I think this one's more about religious sectarianism and kind of a clash of different sects inside of the Middle East. And The Economist had a really disturbing article that came out a couple days before this assassination happened. And they talked about how in late November, an Israeli cabinet meeting was canceled. And Benjamin Netanyahu made his way to the airport where he met with the chief of Mossad, who's a spy named Yossi Cohen. And they flew to Saudi Arabia that day. Obviously, these are reports. I can't confirm it, but it's quite corroborated, so yeah. And Mike Pompeo, America's Secretary of State, was also in the kingdom, meeting Mohammed bin Salman. And apparently, head of Mossad, Benjamin Netanyahu, Mike Pompeo, and MBS of Saudi Arabia were all meeting about a week before this assassination happened. And to me, it seems like it's pretty obvious who did it. And I'm just worried that these people all despise Iran so much that they're not thinking about the repercussions of this. And this makes me think about what should Israel's role be in that region, and should the U.S. always be supportive of it?
Yeah, so...
Sorry, that's a lot there.
No. I mean, I was going to say, who do you think did it? But you kind of already pointed the finger, right? It's Mossad, right? So Mossad is the well-equipped intelligence agency of Israel, and similar to the United States' CIA, but dissimilar in some other ways, which I'm sure we'll touch on. That is who Iran is pointing the finger at. They're accusing Israel of doing this killing. And so let's get into a little bit about the killing, just so people who haven't seen the headline, right? So it was a top nuclear scientist, someone that was involved in Iran's nuclear bomb program, decades ago, right, in the late 90s. And since then, in the 2000s, he supposedly was no longer involved in such things, and that his involvement in these nuclear roles, he attested, was always about energy and peaceful things, never about building a bomb. But there's a couple evidence, and there's reports that he had been secretly working on a bomb project when Iran publicly had denied it, right? So what this is basically this is Iran's top bomb maker of he's their nuke guy, right? He's the nuke guy. He's the Albert Einstein. He's the Oppenheimer, right? The Project Manhattan Oppenheimer of Iran is what I'm gathering, at least from the information that I'm seeing. And he got clapped. He was in a neighborhood in Tehran on Friday, and his security detail, I guess, heard some shots ring out. And what I read was they didn't know what was happening at first, and they thought it was like a car backfiring from an accident or screeches from an accident. They thought an accident. So what I read is that this nuclear scientist actually got out of his bulletproof car because he was part of a security detail. They had like multiple Escalades that were like, blacked out Escalades, bulletproof, the whole shebang. But they were confused as to what was happening in the intersection ahead of them. He hops out of the car to look at what's going on. And when that happens, a remote controlled machine gun lights him up. And he dies in the hospital not long after. And that's what's really crazy is that's what really was, to me at least, what perks my ears is remote controlled machine gun. Oh, we don't know exactly what it is, but the Iranians have given us information that it was remote controlled or satellite controlled. But basically, the shooter was not present. The shooter was not there. And so to me, it doesn't seem like some localized rebel group or maybe a ragtag ISIS group or something like that. To me, it's like, man, you have a satellite-operated machine gun that was pointed at him and was waiting for him to get out the door and lit him up perfectly, and there's no shooter found on the site. That seems high-tech, well-executed, well-planned out. And yeah, I mean, if I had to place a bet on the roulette table, I'd probably put black on Mossad.
Yes, dude, and yeah, I agree with you. It seemed like there was a lot of preparation to do this. It wasn't just some car bombing in Kabul, Afghanistan by the Taliban.
No.
This was something orchestrated. And, and I mean, to make it even more interesting, it was I'm probably going to butcher this name, but it was in the city of Absard, which is 50 miles east of Tehran. And it's basically a rich second home for a lot of Tehran's elites. And so I guess this guy who is dubbed the father of Iran's program, I guess he had a second home there, and he was going there that weekend, or let's see, it was on that weekend specifically. So it took a lot of evidence just to even know that he was going to this location at that time. It wasn't his actual residence. He was there for just a little quick getaway. Interesting stuff. And BBC even says that according to, I think, British intelligence and reports that they've got out of the British government, the killers included a pair of snipers who didn't actually fire, but they were in the location. They formed part of a 62-person group of plotters, and they say that 50 people, according to these reports, and again, I don't really know how much I trust these reports because who the hell knows, but it says the remaining 50 people were just logistical and tech support. And residents in this Absard place said that they heard the sound of a big explosion followed by intense machine gun fire, and they knew the man they were protecting had for years been Mossad's #1 target. And so, I don't know, man, like Occam's razor, simplification by error. It sounds like Mossad does it. And they have a vast network of taking out Israeli enemies throughout the Middle East, Europe, Asia, the United States. I mean, maybe not the United States, I don't know. But Mossad's almost like the CIA with no limits. So they probably did do this. Like, it doesn't surprise me whatsoever.
Yeah, and a little bit to that point, I think they mentioned it. One of the articles we had read about it was basically that idea is, someone from the CIA talked about how, as much as we like to think of it's like the Bourne movies when the guy's in the room and he just like, kill him. And the CIA gets a little text that's like, do it, right? That's not exactly how it goes, right? The CIA has a very lengthy bureaucratic process in which they recommend policies to the president. They don't actually ever decide who to kill. If there is an approved killing, it's done by the president after much delegation, and right, like it's actually a big process that and like it does happen, right? We rocket assassinated a top Iranian general earlier this year, and I'm sure that went through a rigorous process. Not saying it was justified, right? I'm just saying that there's a process that the CIA goes through, that and intelligence agencies go through before they just whack somebody. It's based on what I've seen and what we've read about this. It seems like Mossad has a lot less bureaucratic of a process to get an approval to do these hits, to do these targeted assassinations. They basically just got to get an okay from the prime minister, and they're Gucci.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to my just bigger issue here is that I love Israel. I love the Israeli people. And I think Israel as a state is necessary, but I do not like the Israeli government. And I mean, the Link to Party under Benjamin Netanyahu have become ultra nationalist and kind of detrimental and potentially controversial 100%, and potentially could be stirring up chaos in the Middle East. I also have gathered that same thing. Mossad sounds like the CIA with no strings attached. You really don't. There's no limits as far as I can see on what Mossad's done. And over the years, I mean, they've done some sketchy stuff, man. I mean, there was a killing of a 35-year-old Palestinian scientist in Malaysia,
right?
And in Kuala Lumpur, and it sounded like another similar thing. He was a engineer for power systems and energy saving technology. He was a scientist. He published a multitude of scientific papers, but he was an enemy of the state. And I think it gets dangerous when a country, I mean, obviously the U.S. is not perfect, so I'm not trying to say that like the U.S., like not trying to sound hypocritical here, but I think it is dangerous when any state, the U.S. included, does extrajudicial killings that are outside of the international order. And the Mossad has quite a history of doing this. And, you know, kind of what's the bigger worry for me, though, is that like the actual implications of not Israel, because Israel's going to keep doing this unless they're told not to, unless they get a slap on the wrist, right? And the problem is, though, is that all the information a lot of the West gets about Iran is from Israel, you know, and so it's tough because I actually supported the Soleimani killing. I think that, and obviously there haven't been repercussions as of now from that. And I do think he was a flawed individual who was directly responsible with killing innocent people and Western allies. But this guy's more convoluted because, as you talked about earlier, he was a nuclear engineer, but does it mean he was actually trying to build a bomb? I don't particularly know. But I'm just worried that Iran's already been on the edge. You know, I mean, a year ago we talked about those bombings of those Saudi oil fields back in 2019, you know, with the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Yeah. Iran's been so involved in that area. And now I feel like after this one especially, they need to do something. And that, like, if I was an Iranian official in the military or in their intelligence, I would feel like we almost have to respond to this one because there's a trend that's growing. And to be completely honest, like, I don't really think Iran's even one of the top 5 worst actors in that region. Maybe top 5, but definitely not top 3. And so I'm just concerned that Iran keeps getting the brunt of all these, you know, attacks when I think it's just going to become more like, you know, the U.S. goes in the corner of Qatar and the Emirates and Saudi Arabia now, and Israel kind of just keeps spearheading this propaganda intelligence game of Iran's bad. But we should really recognize that Iran is probably the country we need to work with, and I hope the Biden administration does that. But right now it seems like because Israel kind of has the United States by the balls in terms of what our messaging is in terms of the Middle East, I don't know what's next.
It's crazy to think of how close Iran got to becoming a secular, thriving, modern nation. Like, we forget that there used to be Iranian people in bell-bottom jeans and going on TV shows and driving international cars in the 70s before the revolution, right? So I see what you're saying. Like, I do think that, like, I think that there could be a world where Iran is actually like an ally. It's strange. Yeah. It's just this Ayatollah, right? But obviously, then that's way down the line. I think more immediately is how the United States is going to react to this, because, you know, looking at what this does is, you know, Israel was always very critical of the Iran deal, right? And they thought that it gave Iran too much leeway to kind of go behind the scenes and keep doing what they were doing anyway. And there is some merit to that concern. I mean, obviously, you know, even the accusations against this Fakhrizadeh guy is that he supposedly was out not doing anything nuclear related for 20 years, but the reports are that he's actually still active as the lead nuclear bomb maker. So I get the Israeli concern. It puts President-elect Joe Biden in a weird position because he's been talking about getting back into the nuclear deal. He was always critical of Donald Trump's, you know, ripping that deal to shreds. And now escalations, right? But he also needs to still be allies with Israel because the United States is an ally with Israel. So he's in this weird position where he's going to have to kind of play this, you know, politics, diplomacy game in a ever increasingly volatile Iran. And Iran's in a weird position too, because They have brutal economic sanctions because of the Trump administration. They're not even allowed to access to the financial and banking systems of the West because of the Trump administration. They still want to go back to the deal, but they're also still doing sketchy stuff on the side, which is causing problems. And now their officials are getting picked off, and they have no leeway. They have no leverage. Their general got bombed out by us, and now their top nuclear guy just got clapped by Mossad. And they don't really have much leverage to go again. I mean, they obviously on the state TV, they're talking about revenge. But even I'm reading right now, BBC's monitoring Iranian media, and it says that Iran should not fall into the trap of Israel's attempts to escalate tensions. So they even understand that they don't want to escalate tensions too far. But they're also kind of in this weird position where you're just getting picked off. Your guys are getting picked off, and you have no financial leeway and leverage. I don't really know what Iran's going to do, but it does worry me because it feels like we're putting a pit bull in a corner.
Yeah, man. I think you touched on a multitude of good things there, but the one thing I definitely want to address is that I think it actually really is a chicken or the egg argument when it comes to why is Iran doing what they're doing. And I would say it's because of the sanctions and the anti-Iranian sentiment in the West and Israel's lobby, because North Korea shows us that if you have nukes, you at least have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
Like, I would argue that North Korea has bigger sway in Washington than Iran, which is ridiculous because Iran has oil, a thriving population, an educated population,
right,
amazing culture. Like, there's so many things about Iran, man. Like, if I could fly to Iran right now to travel, I would do it.
Oh, me too. I'd love to.
You know what I mean? Like, it's the Persian culture is like, to me, equivalent to the Greeks. And to me, really what it is that this country was forced against a wall, and especially after the fall of the Shah, and they did go from somewhat of a Western propped up progressive nation to something that was like cast out by the West, and they kind of got desperate. And so I have no doubt in my mind that this chief nuclear scientist is probably expediting bomb development because that's what they need to do. And honestly, if you're Iran, it's probably smart to develop a nuclear bomb. And I'm not condoning that, but
that's the reality.
Yeah, it is the reality. And I do think we do need to have a serious discussion going forward. And I'm sure Biden's team is doing it about how do we view Iran? Because unfortunately today, or maybe it was yesterday at this point, I don't know. Iran's parliament, because of the time difference, probably yesterday, but Iran's parliament did approve a bill to stop nuclear inspections after this assassination.
Right.
And so, again, Trump's foreign policy mixed with Israeli foreign policy, if the Mossad hit is true, it's going to make shit really hard for Biden.
Yeah, it
is. Because Iran approved a bill that would suspend UN inspections of the nuclear facilities. And this was just today on Tuesday. And I'm just worried that this escalating, especially with Israel and Saudi Arabia fanning the flames, it's going to get ugly. And then we have Yemen on the side, man. Like, I feel like, well, the BBC said there's 4 outcomes, and I hope their outcome number 4, which they saved for last, is the true one, which is like do nothing, like Soleimani. So the BBC says their 4th option, which is the least likely, is that Iran does nothing, keeps doing their thing. But I don't know if that's good either. But their number one was that they're going to probably attack Israeli or American targets. And to be completely honest, like, this is not wishing violence on anyone. Like, I think any country would respond after one of your top scientists is murdered.
Yeah, it's what happens. It's what happens. I mean, Libya had one French pilot goes down in Libya, and then the French bomb it for 48 hours straight, right? Like, it happens. And so I think we can expect retaliation, and that is what worries me. It's hard to know the justification for the attack, right? Because obviously Mossad's not coming out and claiming it with a big banner, but we kind of know it's Mossad, right? We have a pretty good hunch, and I think that, like, again, if this is some doomsday scenario where they had intelligence that, like, this guy was gonna get the most pure uranium ever and build the biggest bomb by next week, then yeah, I mean, if that's really the evidence that they had, then yeah, take him out. But it's a worry that you have an intelligence agency from Israel working with such impunity and has been for a while, from what I'm gathering, it doesn't seem to be in line with the foreign policy goals of other actors, right? It seems like Israel's kind of acting on its own instead of like seeing to check if this is okay with the U.S. or anyone else first. And that's what worries me, is that, like, you know, they're acting with such impunity that it could really mess things up for people and escalate this, even when their intentions might have been good.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what just worries me, is that there's such a disconnect, and it could only get worse from here. And I think the disconnect gets worse because, you know, I finished that audiobook finally. You know, I was sitting in my sweats in the sauna on my lunch break at my house, because I don't really leave my house anymore for anything. But
right.
I was finishing that audiobook. I was listening to Disunited Nations, and it was kind of talking about the post-U.S. order and kind of, you know, what's next, because the U.S. has dominated the last 50 years, but obviously something else is next. And it talks about how, like, the U.S. going to bed now with the UAE and Qatar and Israel and Saudi Arabia, of course, could be actually detrimental, because these are three actors that are relatively pragmatic when it comes to religion. That's probably why they're willing to work with the U.S., because they're not really,
And
by
with each
definition,
other.
like, yes, exactly. But they're actually some of the most evil actors in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Like, if you really look at the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, they're really bad. But because we've kind of gotten to bed with them, I imagine our intelligence is going that way as well, because that's what we get. Like, and there was an interesting article in the BBC again that talks about how Pompeo was encouraged by Trump to do as much as he can. And this was just yesterday. So this is not just the bomb Iran thing from a couple of weeks ago that Mike Pence talked Trump out of. But this is yesterday. Trump tells Pompeo, in quotes, "Go wild on Iran. Just don't risk World War III." And there's some interesting correlations between, what's her name? Haspel. I forget her. Gina Haspel, the director of the CIA. There's a gentleman, Mark Dubowitz, who is the CEO of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which is obviously pretty damn right wing. But he says there's obviously a close working relationship between Mossad chief Yossi Cohen and Gina Haspel of the CIA. And he says that there's a lot of correlations going on between what the CIA and Trump are doing, especially under the head of Pompeo, and what is happening in Iran. So I really do fear, man, that Mossad maybe did this. Maybe Israel did this, but I do think there's a USA, because the timing is just so perfect, right? Election, Trump's losing. Lose it. I don't know why I said losing. He's lost. Let me use the right tense there. And it just, the timing of this, man, is nuts. And if Gina Haspel, who I actually think is quite a good director in a lot of ways, I don't really think she's an exception to the problem. I think the CIA always does this. It's just alarming, because I hope this is not the next strategy in Iran. It's just wiping out officials that we don't agree with, and Mossad tells us it's good to go, and they front the bill of troops and guns and intelligence.
What I don't want is another Iraq where we risk life and limb and spend all this money with the fear of nuclear weapons that never was really there, right? Like, I'm not saying that there's no possibility. I mean, I am worried about Iran having a nuclear weapon. Don't get me wrong, but it's like, are we doing perhaps too much of these attacks when, you know, their threat is not that great, right? Are we, like, that's my question, is like, and again, I don't know the answer, because I don't know all this deep top secret intelligence. Like, again, this guy that was killed, if he had the mastermind plans to a killer bomb that was almost done next week, then yes, like, I get it. I get why they took him out, but I don't have that information. And going off of what's happened in the Middle East in the past, sometimes we're given information that's not true, that is used to justify escalation. And that's what I'm worried of, because that's exactly what happened in Iraq. We were all told about weapons of mass destruction that really didn't lead anywhere, and we escalated things that didn't have to be.
Yes. And, you know, I think what we have to do is kind of maybe fact check or get a backup of our intelligence channels that we're using.
Yeah.
Especially when Israel is leading the way. And I understand the Israel side.
Of course,
I'll
I do
just say,
too.
because
I do too.
Yeah, like Iran does not like Israel. I'm sure if they had the means to do it, they would help fund some counterinsurgents to get Israel off the map.
Oh, I mean, they say it. They say it out loud, right? Bomb Israel off the face of the earth. I mean, they're pretty blatant.
Right, but it's almost like in Israel's self-defense and their reaction to that, they've almost made the issue worse. And now they've found actors like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Dubai or Qatar who are willing to go that next step with them because they want chaos and change.
Enemy of my enemy is my friend, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, we should probably wrap this one up. It's certainly going to leave, here with the U.S. perspective, it's certainly going to leave some complications for the incoming President Joe Biden regarding the Middle East and his international relations there. So we'll see how this plays out. I really hope that another war doesn't start with Iran. Iran is certainly in a weird spot too. They're going to have to figure out how they want to react because it's not exactly like they have a lot of freedom. So we'll see. Let's see what happens. But certainly a crazy story when you hear about a remote-controlled machine gun gunning down a top nuclear bomb maker in a Middle Eastern country. It sounds like something out of a film. Let us know your thoughts on this matter. Do you think that this action was justified? Do you think that Mossad's behind it? A couple of other names have been said, some Iranian groups as well, including the CIA. So who do you think's behind it? Let us know your thoughts. And as always, you can find us on YouTube, Twitch. We live stream right around 6:30 p.m. on Tuesdays. YouTube to get the whole clips, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, the whole shebang. And let us know your thoughts. Comment, leave a comment. Come into Twitch chat, make fun of my nose or something. We welcome it all. Thank you again for watching, and have a good week.
Adios.